During a typhoon, I stopped my boyfriend from rushing under a sign to save his first love. The next moment the sign fell, crushing the girl. I didn't dodge the broken glass from the shattered window in time, leaving a scar on my face. The girl had both her arms broken, and her piano career ended. Heartbroken, she jumped off a building. As for me, my face was scarred forever. 2 years later, my boyfriend proposed to me, and I said yes. But during our honeymoon, he pushed me off a cliff. As I was dying, he whispered in my ear, "If you hadn't stopped me, Susan wouldn't have died. You got what you deserve." Filled with bitter resentment, I died. Then I woke up, back to that typhoon day. The wind was so strong, I could barely stand. Collapse sounds were all around. I was holding onto an arm tightly. The arm belonged to Mark, my boyfriend. Not too far away, a girl in a white dress was struggling under a lamppost, crying for help. Seeing this familiar scene, it hit me. I was reborn. In my past life, before the typhoon hit, I had stocked up supplies at home, waiting for Mark to return from working overtime. When the storm started, I couldn't reach Mark by phone and got worried, so I went downstairs. But then I saw something that left me stunned. He was against the wall, calling out to Susan. Susan was his first love. I'd heard she had left the country after they broke up. What was she doing here? Susan was clinging to a streetlight, her slender body swayed by the wind, like a fragile flower ready to be destroyed. Later, I found out that Mark wasn't working late. He was picking up Susan, who had just returned. He meant to find her a place to stay. But the typhoon came too fast, hotels were closed, and Susan had nowhere to go. Mark had to bring her to our place. As soon as they got downstairs, the wind gusted, blowing Susan away. She barely held onto a streetlight. Seeing the sign above about to fall, Mark was desperate to rescue her. Right then, I ran out and instinctively stopped him, worried he'd get hurt. That brief delay caused the sign to fall, crashing onto Susan. I couldn't dodge the falling glass shards from a shattered window above, cutting my face from eyebrow to jaw. Through the searing pain, with blood all over my face, I watched Mark frantically scream Susan's name. The typhoon wreaked havoc, damaging property and injuring many. Susan was hurt the worst. The falling sign smashed her hands. She had to have them amputated. For a pianist, this destroyed her life. A month later, despondent, she jumped from a building. The day she died, I was worried about Mark. But he seemed calm, saying life and death are fate. It couldn't be helped. I sensed something was off, but I trusted him and didn't dig deeper. Until 2 years later, when he pushed me off a cliff. I broke countless bones, my body racked with pain, bleeding from everywhere. I couldn't move. As I lay dying, Mark stood over me with a cold look I'd never seen. "If you hadn't stopped me, Susan wouldn't have died." She must have felt so hopeless back then. Now it's your turn to feel that. You got what you deserve. Waking from the memory, I heard glass shattering above, and saw the sign above Susan shaking dangerously. Mark was shouting Susan's name. I suddenly let go of Mark's hand. As he ran towards his first love, I turned and ran to safety. Sounds of glass shattering, and a sign falling mixed with screams behind me. I quickened my pace, not looking back. It wasn't until the typhoon ended, and people started coming downstairs, that I casually called for an ambulance. Because Mark risked his life to protect her, Susan only got minor injuries. But Mark had a broken spine and nerve damage. He'd never stand again. While Mark was unconscious, I sat by his bed, thinking back to our past. We worked at the same theater. He was tall, handsome, and talented, a star performer. I was a stage planner. We were just co-workers until he fell ill during a performance and passed out after. Everyone else was busy, so I took him to the hospital and cared for him for a couple of days. After that, we got closer, occasionally chatting outside work. One day, he suddenly confessed to me. He said I was gentle and caring, someone easy to like. Based on what I'd seen, he seemed nice. I had a bit of a crush too, so I said yes. A year after we started dating, I was having dinner with his friends. I went to the bathroom, and when I returned, I heard them talking about a girl named Susan. Susan was Mark's ex and first love. They met at the same university, both in the arts, Mark in dance, Susan in piano. They were a perfect match until Susan went to France for her career and cut off contact, leading to their breakup. Mark confessed to me to get over her. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel hurt. I figured that even if he cares a lot about this relationship, he's my boyfriend now. As long as I treat him well, he'll eventually let go of Susan. But looking back at how things turned out in my previous life, I really overestimated myself. Suddenly, a voice from next to me snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned my head and looked at the bed next to mine. The guy over there was also injured in this typhoon, but it was just a minor injury, a broken ankle. He's got one leg in a sling, but seems pretty upbeat, holding his phone high to show off his foot on camera. Guys, can you believe it? I almost died in this typhoon. It hit me. Susan, who lost her hand in the past life, was in this room too. And this guy was on the next bed. He's a low-tier streamer, always online, making a big deal out of his broken ankle. After Susan's tragic jump, he even streamed the whole thing, milking it for attention. The guy has no limits. I pulled up his stream. There weren't many viewers, just a handful of random comments. I smirked. Just showing your broken foot ain't gonna draw crowds. Let me help you with that. I immediately started sobbing, resting my head on Mark's bed and crying softly. The crying caught the attention of the guy next door, who quickly turned his phone towards me. Hey, what's wrong, girl? Why are you crying? My boyfriend, he's never going to walk again because he saved someone. Wow, your boyfriend's a hero. I wiped my tears and sniffled. He was working overtime, came home during the typhoon. I went downstairs to meet him and saw him risking everything to save someone. The guy next door paused, suddenly recalling something. Oh, I remember. He was brought in with a girl too. He got hurt saving her, right? I think she's in the room next door. His eyes lit up with curiosity. So what's the deal between your boyfriend and that girl? I clenched my skirt, lowered my head, bit my lip, and silently let the tears flow. He got the hint, covered his mouth, and whispered to his audience. Guys, I think I stumbled onto some juicy gossip here. With my head down, he couldn't see my silent smirk. Hero saving a damsel storylines always grab the public's attention, and once there's news like this, it catches fire fast. Internet sleuths are relentless, and they'll soon dig up the truth about the hero and the damsel. By then, their actual relationship will be out in the open. Running to save someone is undoubtedly commendable, but secretly meeting up with your ex and leaving your current girlfriend in a Category 5 typhoon? What then? I'm really curious to see how this unfolds. Susan, who had only suffered minor superficial injuries, soon regained consciousness. She was shocked and saddened to learn Mark would never walk again because he saved her, and she broke down crying at his bedside. Naturally, that got streamed too. I played my part well, the sad but quietly resilient current girlfriend, until Mark's parents arrived from out of town. They cried as soon as they walked into the room, mourning their only son who had a bright future, but was now ruined. While crying, they also scolded me. It's all your fault. Why didn't you stop him? If you'd stopped him, this wouldn't have happened. I stayed silent. After Susan's death in my last life, Mark claimed he didn't care, but he turned to heavy drinking for a while. His parents saw their son spiraling and turned their anger on me for stopping him from saving someone, blaming me for his state. They said I was selfish and not as selfless or kind-hearted as Susan, and if I were in danger, Susan would never have stopped Mark from saving me. Back then, I felt guilty and said nothing in my defense. But looking at the current situation, I didn't stop him from saving anyone this time, yet still ended up in a bad spot. Susan was crying too, apologizing while she cried. Mark's mom slapped her without a word. You left him for a better future abroad. Why couldn't you just leave for good? Why come back and string him along, causing him to end up like this? What about my son's future? You're just a curse. Mark's dad sighed heavily, tears in his eyes. Son, we told you to cut ties with this woman, but you didn't listen. You even went all the way to France to see her several times. You gave so much for her, and she puts you in this mess. It's tragic. I was quietly standing by, playing my part, but those words made me jerk my head up. Uncle, what did you say? Mark's dad looked embarrassed for a moment and clammed up. But he'd already said it, and I heard it. After getting with me, Mark often traveled abroad, claiming it was for work. Turns out he was visiting Susan, wasn't he? And his parents knew all along. I was the only one in the dark. Ha, how funny. Susan, her face swollen from the slap, kneeled and cried, pleading with Mark's parents. Uncle, Auntie, Mark is like this because of me. I'm sorry. I'll stay by his side and take care of him. Saying it like that, full of emotion and righteousness. As if she wasn't the one who abandoned her long-term boyfriend for a brighter future. I glanced over at the guy next door, still sneakily filming. Noticing he was focusing the camera on me, I quickly put on a heartbroken expression, tears falling as I quietly left the room. Once outside, I checked the stream. Some comments were empathetic, talking about how tragic this love story was. But some folks were more clear-headed, posting, as if these jerks deserve this outcome. What about the girl next to them? She's the real victim here, betrayed by scumbags. What did she do wrong? Screw them. Let those cheaters be stuck together. Beautiful girl, you deserve better. I couldn't help but chuckle. I wiped away the tears I had to force out and walked out of the hospital with big steps. Yeah, those two were a match made in heaven. They should spend their whole lives together. I hadn't been to the hospital in days. In the meantime, Mark's parents called me a couple of times, even blaming me for not visiting him. I can only say their nerve is unbelievable. I dragged it out until Mark woke up. Then I finally took my time and went to the hospital. Mark was lying in bed, pale-faced. Even in his wrecked state, his eyes were full of pain and loss. Only when he looked at Susan did they fill with softness and relief. Susan had cried for days and was still crying. It's my fault. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have. How can this be your fault? Mark wiped her tears away. As long as you're okay, what does it matter if I'm like this? Susan cried in Mark's arms and Mark held her tight. They leaned into each other all lovey-dovey. They were truly meant for each other. Even though I knew it wasn't great to interrupt, I walked into the room in my heels anyway. The person in the next bed, not wanting to miss the drama, grabbed their phone and started live streaming covertly. When Mark saw me, a guilty look flashed in his eyes. He instinctively let go of Susan's hand. Sophia, you're here. Susan fixed her clothes, probably feeling a bit awkward. She found an excuse and left the room. Mark still tried to make excuses for himself. I just saw how upset she was, so Sophia, don't take it to heart. At this point, he was still lying to me. I pinched myself secretly, forcing tears to well up, then broke up with him. Mark's expression turned ugly fast. What? Now that I'm ruined, you're just gonna ditch me? I pinched myself pretty hard. It hurt so much tears just poured out. Am I leaving you? Or are you leaving me? Mark, in the 2 years we've been together, I never asked about your past love life. Always trusted you. Yet how did you treat me? You'd say you were going abroad, saying it was for work, but it was to see her. The day of the typhoon, you said you were working late, but your late work was picking her up from the airport, planning to bring her to our home. Mark looked embarrassed and even a bit angry. You're overthinking it. There's nothing between us. Can you not make a scene? I'm overthinking? Making a scene? I pulled out my phone and showed him Susan's Instagram. Take a good look at what she posted. Which one isn't about you? You spent birthdays with her, went on vacations with her, saw her performances. And this photo, your French kiss with her, how was that? Mark's face grew more and more troubled, with no way to argue back. He fell silent. In my past life, I didn't realize until I was dying why he hated me, yet still wanted to marry me. I was an only child. Dad was the chairman of the Provincial Writers Association. Mom was a retired national-level actress. And the drama group's head wanted me to take over. Mark could gain a lot from being connected to my family for his career. Not to mention my parents doted on me, bought 3 houses in full in the capital, all in my name, and their future assets would go to me. Even if he hated my guts, Mark wouldn't let me go. He wanted to leech off my family till they were dust. Thinking about all this, my tone inadvertently turned cold. For her, you risked everything, even your life to save her. I realized I could never reach you all my life. So why should I cling to you? Mark's fists clenched and unclenched. Finally, he squeezed out. I'm sorry, but could I get another chance now? I picked up my bag and turned to leave. Before I left, I noticed the extremely excited face of the person in the next bed. Take this juicy story and run with it, don't let me down. As I walked out of the room, I saw Susan outside. Her expression was complicated. If Mark were still whole, the victorious other woman in her would have surely shown off to me. But Mark was worthless now. The whole package is all yours, including his useless lower half. How satisfied are you? I went back to the theater. After Mark's half-body paralysis, the lead actor was replaced with someone new. Fresh blood was endless. There was never a shortage. The new lead was a guy named Daniel, fresh out of dance school. Daniel was young, naive, good-looking, and sweet-talking, always politely calling me planning sister whenever he saw me. People naturally like beautiful things, it's instinctual. Everyone quickly bonded with Daniel. After a show, while I was chatting with Daniel backstage, I suddenly saw Mark coming in. Now he could only sit in a wheelchair, with Susan pushing him. He was there to handle his resignation. Susan's face twisted subtly when she saw me, a little hard to notice dissatisfaction. I ignored her and Mark, continuing to chat with Daniel about upcoming performance plans. Mark suddenly interrupted us. Sophia, who is he? How is who he is any of your business? My reply made Mark's face turn sour. He stared at Daniel, full of undisguised hostility. Daniel scratched his nose, clueless as to how he'd offended this person. The director then showed up. I had already told the theater folks the reason for my breakup with Mark. Everyone knew Mark had been two-timing me, and no matter how close they were with him before, no one was fond of him now, especially the director. He was a friend of my father, and always looked after me like I was his kid. He was in a funky mood for days after finding out about Mark's betrayal. If I hadn't stopped him, he'd have stormed into the hospital to tear Mark a new one by now. While handling the paperwork for Mark, the person said to him, "Even though you can't stand now, don't give up. Keep up with rehab, and maybe one day you'll be back on stage." It sounded encouraging, but there was an undercurrent of sarcasm. After all, even the doctors had said that the chances of nerves healing were almost non-existent. The director's hollow reassurance was a real stab in the heart. After finishing his resignation paperwork, Mark didn't leave right away. He sat there watching the actors rehearse on stage. A young, energetic guy had taken his place, pouring his heart and soul into the performance. The spotlight and everyone's eyes were on him. When rehearsal wrapped, the staff gave him cheers and applause, which once were all for Mark. I took a glance at the audience and saw Mark looking pale, his hands gripping the blanket on his lap tightly. Susan looked at Mark, her eyes filled with clear guilt and pity. This version of Susan didn't have the experiences of her past life, so she didn't realize that her look was like a sharp knife for someone suffering like Mark. Mark closed his eyes for a moment and then spoke. "Susan, let's go." Susan agreed and wheeled Mark away, leaving the world that used to be his behind. I smirked. I wondered if he regretted risking his life to save someone back then. As performances increased, I got even busier. On a rare day off, I finally caught a break and met up with my best friend Clara at a cafe. The moment we met, Clara was excited to show me a video. It was shot in a supermarket, featuring Mark's mom scolding Susan beside her. "You're such a spoiled brat. You can't even tell the difference between bread flour and corn starch. I have no idea what my son saw in you. He risked his life for you, and now our family's stuck with this bad luck. You've ruined everything." Susan gritted her teeth, looking defiant. Since birth, she had been pampered by her family, only touching piano keys, never having done chores. So how could she know such things? She was used to being babied, and rarely got scolded by her parents. But Mark's mom scolded her constantly, and she couldn't stand it. So Susan stood her ground and argued back. The two of them went at it, neither backing down, drawing a crowd. Clara was among them, grabbing the best spot to watch and film it all. She was thrilled to show it to me. Honestly, it was kinda amusing. In a past life, Mark's mom always said I wasn't as good as Susan. Now with me and Susan switching roles, she still doesn't seem satisfied. Clara leaned in close. "You know, that Susan chick is something else. She dumped Mark and ran abroad, and Mark still can't forget about her. Totally whipped. Yeah, he was definitely devoted. Talking about Mark now brought no feelings for me, no waves at all. If he had feelings, I was fine with letting him have them. But who knows how long the person he traded the rest of his life for would stick around? That's uncertain. One day after work at the theater, as I was about to leave, Daniel suddenly appeared in front of me. He had his hands behind his back, ears a bit red, very suspicious. "What's up?" I asked. "You have something to say?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then brought his hands forward, revealing a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite. "Well, I just wanted to ask if you're free tonight. I'd like to treat you to dinner." "What are you trying to confess to me?" I said directly, which made Daniel turn beet red. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded with reddened cheeks. Young guys are so naive, unlike me, whose heart is as old and worn out as a dog's. I don't get flustered in these situations. If I were a few years younger, I'd probably say yes right then. Everyone loves pretty things, and I'm no exception. The hormones would have made me want to drop everything and dive into love. But I'm not that young girl anymore. I've lived twice and actually died once, so the passion from back then is long gone. I still appreciate beautiful people, but now it's just for looking. I politely turned him down, watching the light fade from his eyes as he walked away sadly. After watching him leave, I turned my gaze to a shadowy corner. There was a wheelchair there. Mark had been there for quite a while. Lately, he would sneak into the theater through the back door. He often hid in unnoticed corners, looking at the able-bodied actors with envy, sometimes even jealousy, as they moved and shone on stage. That stage used to be his too. I turned away, ready to leave, but Mark called out to me. "Why didn't you say yes to him? Why does it matter to you whether I did or didn't? Did you say no because you still have feelings for me?" The nerve of this guy. Cheating was your choice, betrayal was yours, and you repeatedly lied to me. You're practically a bad person. Why would I bother holding on to feelings for someone like you? Who gave you that kind of confidence? Mark's face turned sour at my words. "And why are you out here alone? Where's Susan?" Mark suddenly dropped his head and went silent. I knew why. In her past life, Susan lost both arms, and she couldn't even take care of her basic needs. Susan was always proud of her looks and talents, but she lost all of that. She used to be like a beautiful moon in the sky, but now she's fallen into the mud. She couldn't handle the stark contrast and almost broke down. Back then, anytime she saw Mark, she'd go nuts, screaming at him about why he didn't save her. Now Mark's in the same boat as Susan was. He used to be the shining star on stage, but now he can't even stand. He can't control his bodily functions either. What he hates most are the looks he gets from people. They used to be filled with envy, admiration, and love. Now it's just disgust, disdain, pity, and mockery. Even his first love, for whom he sacrificed almost everything, gags at the sight of his incontinence. Once a golden boy, now he's a broken man. Maybe he doesn't regret saving his first love, but this stark contrast has to sting. Yet it's the path he chose, and he can't blame anyone else. Though Susan once promised she'd stick by Mark, I knew she'd leave eventually. I just didn't expect her to cut and run quite so quickly. It only took 2 months before she couldn't take it anymore. I heard she left without her luggage, sneaking out to run to the airport, bound for France. But before she got on the plane, Mark and his parents caught up with her. Mark's dad yelled at her for being ungrateful. His mom threw a fit, crying to everyone around that her son's condition was her fault. And now she's abandoning him. Mark clutched Susan's clothes with all his strength, his hands shaking with the effort. His eyes, bloodshot and pleading, seemed to say, "Susan, I'm like this because of you. I've lost everything. You're all I have left. How could you leave me? Do you want me stuck by your side forever?" Susan cried out, hurt and angry. "You're a shell of the man you used to be. But I'm still a normal person. I'm just 25. I'm young. I have dreams. Do you expect me to stay and take care of you forever?" Even when Mark was a promising dancer, he couldn't hold on to someone with Susan's ambitions. Without the ability to care for himself, can the mere fact that he saved her really keep her by his side? Especially when Susan values cunning over gratitude. Years ago, she didn't leave the country just to study. She ditched Mark for a rich kid. That rich kid moved on quickly, leaving her high and dry, and she suddenly remembered her loyal admirer back home. I heard all this from Clara, who's always in everybody's business. She said Mark and his family fought with Susan for a while at the airport. But in the end, they couldn't stop her from leaving. When Susan jumped on that plane without a second thought, Mark was devastated. Clara said, "Serves him right. He's getting what he deserves." Honestly, I saw it coming. After Susan left, Mark was down for a bit, keeping to himself at home. Meanwhile, the theater's doing great. I took our dance troupes to a few international competitions, and we did really well. During this time, Mark called me a bunch of times. I knew what he wanted to say, yet I didn't want to hear it. So I just blocked his number. After traveling all over, when I returned to the theater, my colleagues told me, "Sophia, he's shown up a few times looking for you, like a ghost that won't let go." After work, as I stepped out of the theater, there he was, wearing a white shirt, sitting in his wheelchair at the entrance. My eyes landed on that white shirt. I bought that as my first gift when we first started dating, on a business trip to London. It was a designer piece, subtle but elegant and pricey. I thought he'd look great in it. When he got it, he thanked me but never wore it. He didn't even fold it properly, just stuffed it in the closet. Later, when I browsed Susan's Instagram, I saw a post of hers. Had a designer make a custom suit for my love. He looks amazing. Next to it was a picture of Mark in a suit, watching the sunset with her. I remember that suit. He wore it when he got back from a trip, sent it to the cleaners after, and wouldn't let me touch it to iron it. I didn't know it was from Susan, and wondered why he treasured such a cheap-looking suit. But back then, I didn't realize it wasn't about the suit. It was about who gave it to him. Like that white shirt hidden away in the closet, I was never valued. But to my surprise, he puts that shirt on now. Pushing his wheelchair, he rolls over. Now he can only look up at me. "Sophia, I know now. I shouldn't have treated you like that. For the sake of what we had, can you give me another chance?" I stay silent, just watching him lower his pride, begging as he lightly tugs at my sleeve. Just like when he begged Susan to stay. But I feel nothing. A crowd gathers, whispering like I'm some heartless villain. "Well, you've learned to use your situation to your advantage," I say. "But do you really think it's gonna work?" Mark's face freezes slightly, then he slowly lowers his hand. "I had a dream," he suddenly says. "In the dream, it was that stormy day again. You were trying so hard to hold on to me that you got your face cut by falling glass. She lost her hands and ended it all, and your face was scarred. You saved me, but I was disgusted by your appearance, and then I pushed you off a cliff." Remembering my past life, the hatred I'd kept buried for so long began to boil over again. I let out a cold laugh. "You only want me back, 'cause you can't handle Susan leaving. Just want me as a stand-in." I fell for it once, but not again. I looked down at him, slowly leaned in close to his ear. "And what makes you think I'd give a murderer a second chance?" Mark's eyes trembled. You had that dream too." "For me, it wasn't a dream." I stared straight into his eyes. I don't even know how many bones I broke, bled too much. It was really cold at the bottom of that cliff. You guess how long I struggled after you left before I finally died. Mark's face turned pale bit by bit. He muttered, "So that's why you didn't save me this time," I nodded. "Yep." His eyes turned red, tears flowing down without stopping. He shook uncontrollably, apologizing over and over. But what good are apologies? I glanced at his legs, now wasting away, and said calmly, "All I can say is, you deserve the fate you're in now." I gave him back his own words. I turned and walked towards the garage. Mark tried to follow, but there were steps leading to the garage, and his wheelchair couldn't get down. He could only shout my name, initially pleading cautiously, then nearly desperate, and finally, screaming in rage. He was completely broken, but I felt incredibly calm, not looking back. I knew Mark wouldn't just accept it, and sure enough, he didn't. He posted a video online, showing his once hidden disabled body. He talked about how glorious his past was, and how miserable his present is. The reason for his injury? He saved a girl. He portrayed her as ungrateful, just leaving without any thanks. Of course, he didn't forget to mention me. Talked about how his ex-girlfriend just turned and left without hesitation when he became useless. Mark hoped to use online opinions to guilt Susan and me, but Susan's abroad, and nothing from back home could affect her. As for me, I didn't need to defend myself. Because Mark, being the fool he is, didn't know he'd already been exposed on someone else's camera before. He thought netizens would bash the gold digger in me. Little did he know, his video was quickly met with a flood of insults. Cheater, blaming your ex for leaving after you cheated. You brought this on yourself. Blaming others is laughable. Is his internet down? Doesn't he know we've already seen his true colors? I bet Mark was bewildered seeing those comments. Thanks to him paying to boost his video, an old live video by another creator that once spread in a small circle suddenly went viral, rocketing to trending topics, making sure everyone knew the story. His plan to use online outrage against me failed spectacularly, tying him up in his own web. Buried under insults, he had to delete the video and lay low for a long while. His parents did come looking for me a few times. At first they pleaded, playing pitiful, begging me to go back. Later, they resorted to cursing and threatening, even disrupting our theater shows. Eventually, after the head of the theater and actors couldn't take it anymore, the police were called, and they were detained for 10 days, finally calming down. Mark showed up again 3 months later. He was a completely changed, pitiful wreck, gaunt and ghostly. He constantly lurked in the shadows watching me the whole theater. Clara noticed too when she came by. She shivered, touching her goosebumps. Geez, he's creepy, Sophia. I've heard some people develop mental issues after major accidents. Who knows what he might do? Be careful. He looks real spooky right now. I chuckled and assured her. Even without his disability, Mark was a dark person. Such people are always dangerous. How could I not be on guard? I started being cautious, avoiding isolated places, even moved to a new place with extra locks and several cameras. But I never expected Mark to be so gutsy. During a theater rehearsal, a fire suddenly broke out in the backstage area. When people discovered it and tried to escape, they found both front and back doors locked with new keys. No one knew who or when they were locked. The director had already called 911. But while waiting, the fire spread to the front stage. In the thick smoke, screams erupted. The director calmed others, and a few of us decided to scatter and grab fire extinguishers from the hydrants. But when I ran down the hallway by the back door, I saw Mark. Around us, cries and screams continued, but his face was blank, indifferent even. My consciousness clicked into place. Did you set this fire? I did. He admitted bluntly. I can't stand dance or have a future anymore. Why should I be a ruined man while they get to walk rosy paths? His face twisted, gaze hard on me. And you? If you had stopped me back then, how would I have ended up like this? Other men make mistakes too. Why nail me to this shame cross? Why not forgive me? Why hate me so deeply, Sophia? You're just like them. You all deserve to die. How ridiculous. He killed me so brutally, and has the nerve to ask why I don't forgive him. Just because his life's ruined doesn't mean he should ruin everyone else's. Ruin me. What difference is there between someone like him and a beast? I noticed a set of keys resting on his legs. As I got closer to him, I said, "Do you know why I can't forgive you? Because you didn't just kill me back then. You also killed our child." Mark, who was hysterical just a moment ago, was suddenly stunned. Child? Yeah, it's been 2 months, I calmly told him everything. I planned to tell you this happy news at the end of our honeymoon. But I never got the chance because you killed me. You killed both me and our child. Someone like you doesn't deserve anyone's forgiveness. By the time I said this, I was right in front of Mark. He stared at me blankly. He could have had a happy family, the 3 of us living a beautiful life. But he destroyed all of it with his own hands. The smoke was starting to spread. While he was still dazed, I reached for the keys. But the next moment Mark's left hand, which had been hidden under the blanket, suddenly swung out, holding a knife, ready to stab me. It's all your fault. You forced me into this. Give back everything you owe me. We were too close, and his sudden outburst caught me off guard. I was prepared to take the blow just to grab the keys. But then someone pushed me away with force, and another hand knocked the knife away. I looked up at Daniel, who had just saved me. He tossed the keys into my hand. Sophia, you go unlock the door. I'll check the 2nd and 3rd floors to see if anyone's left behind. I nodded quickly and watched him go upstairs. Mark's veins bulged. He furiously maneuvered his wheelchair towards me, trying to snatch the keys. But the wheelchair got stuck on clutter, flipping over violently. Mark lay on the ground, trapped under the wheelchair, squirming like a helpless creature. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't free his paralyzed lower body from underneath it. Smoke billowed around and flames crept closer. The heat turned Mark's face ghastly pale, and he reached out to me. "Sophia, the fire's coming. Pull me out of here." I laughed as I stepped back. "Mark, people like you aren't worth saving." With that, I turned and ran. Mark's cries were desperate. "Sophia! Save me! Sophia!" His shouts echoed one after another as I kept running forward, not looking back. As the fire was about to reach the main entrance, I sprinted over and opened the door. Daniel also came down with 2 staff members he found on the second floor. After escaping the theater, the director, hearing from Daniel and me that Mark was responsible, was furious and cursed, pounding his thighs. Cursing, he suddenly paused. "Where's Mark?" Indeed, where was Mark? When the rescue team arrived, they put out the fire and pulled out a charred body from inside. In this fire, Mark was the only fatality. When Mark's parents heard the bad news, they were heartbroken and came to the theater with banners, demanding an explanation. The enraged director immediately presented backstage surveillance footage. The footage showed Mark bringing gasoline into the backstage several times while we were busy with rehearsals, eventually tossing a lit lighter. "You've got some nerve asking me for an explanation. I should be asking you for one. Our theater losses. You must compensate." Mark's dad was dumbfounded. Meanwhile, Mark's mom resorted to her old antics of making a fuss. But this wasn't something complaints could solve. They had to sell their house to pay the debts, and ended up living in a cheap rental. After the theater relocated and was rebuilt, my life got back on track. Though I declined several times, Daniel kept pursuing me. I've lost that youthful passion, focus more on reality now. But this silly guy gets braver with every setback, like he's got a thick skull. He won't give up unless he hits a dead end, and even then, he'd break through it to keep going. I talked about him with Clara over hot pot, saying, "Does he also want to eat up everything I have like Mark did?" Clara burst into laughter. "You didn't know?" "Know what?" "Daniel's family owns several public companies. He doesn't need your little bit of money." "My bad." Turns out there was a real big shot right by my side. Honestly, I planned to be single and fabulous forever. But a change happened a year later. Another typhoon hit. This one was just as strong as the one a year ago. Unfortunately, I was stuck at the theater due to work. When the typhoon reached its peak, the window on the second floor shattered. Daniel arrived just in time to witness the glass explosion. He instinctively shielded me and guided me to a safe corner. Once we reached safety, I noticed his back was covered in cuts from the glass. But he didn't care about himself. He was primarily concerned if I was hurt. At that moment, I thought maybe we should be together. Despite being hurt before, deep down I still hoped for someone who genuinely prioritized me. So far, Daniel seemed to be doing okay. After the typhoon passed, I accepted Daniel's 7th proposal. On the day I agreed, the silly guy gathered his friends and had them all excitedly calling me sis-in-law. Childish behavior. But I didn't dislike it. Not long after, Clara and I went out to eat. Susan was his first girlfriend. I heard she went abroad after they broke up. "How come she's here?" I paused, surprised to hear about her again. Clara took a sip of her wine and started gossiping with me. "I have a friend who's in the study abroad circle, and she's a classmate of Susan's. She said after Susan went back to France, she hooked up with a rich guy old enough to be her dad. She became his mistress. Then the guy's wife found out and beat her up. In the fight, Susan injured her hand really bad, like the tendons were messed up. She couldn't play piano anymore, and she lost her baby at 6 months. At this point, Clara showed me a picture. It was Susan when she first got back home. She looked pale and worn out, her eyes were empty, totally different from her once vibrant self. I sighed. Even if she got another chance, without that typhoon, she couldn't escape the fate of her hand getting ruined. Maybe it was karma in a way. After hanging out with Clara for a while, I called Daniel to pick me up. Daniel's voice was super gentle over the phone. "Sophia, hang in there a bit. I'm in line buying boba tea. I want mine with ice." Nope, it's not good for you to have cold drinks these days. Give it a few days, and I'll get you 2 cups. Clara overheard and squealed, covering her mouth. He makes me want to cry. He remembers your cycle. I laughed and said this little brother is really considerate. After all that's happened, the past will eventually fade. We just need to love ourselves. In the end, we'll meet someone who's worth it. The end.